one student at Rayan School, Islamabad campus. So, viewers, today I am here with a new Maya. So, our today's Maya topic is belief into events that have significantly impacted history. So, let's start our today's Maya. So, first of all, call the Maya for some questions.
Hey there, what's up?
Okay, so my first question from you is sorry. First, I will clear you. What is our topic? So our today's topic delve into events that have significantly impacted history. So let's start. First of all, my first question from you is what event do you think changed human history the most? So please give me a very interesting answer and fully long answer on this topic. So let's start your.
That's a huge question. Honestly, it's tough to pick just one, but if I had to choose, I'd say the Neolithic Revolution when humans first started farming. Before that, we were nomads, always moving to find food. Agriculture allowed for permanent settlements, populations to grow, specialized labor to emerge, and basically all the building blocks of civilization to come together. It's easy to see modern tech revolutions like the internet as game changers, and they are. But farming was the original reset. Without that shift to agriculture, none of the other monumental events would have even been possible. What makes you ask?
Okay, so my next question from you is how did the agriculture revolution transform early human life? So why was the invention of writing such as important milestone? So please give me a very interesting answer on this topic. I'm waiting for your long and interesting answer. So let's start your answer.
The agricultural revolution changed absolutely everything about early human life. It was this total system overhaul. Prior to farming around 10,000 BCE, most people lived in small nomadic groups, constantly hunting and gathering for survival. Life was tough, unpredictable, and centered around finding the next meal. Then, with the Neolithic Revolution, humans started intentionally planting seeds, domesticating animals, and building settlements in one place. Now, there were predictable food resources. This allowed people to stop moving around all the time. The biggest shift might have been that people didn't need everyone doing the same survival stuff all day. Some people could become craftspeople, religious leaders, potters, weavers. Suddenly, there's this explosion of specialization, which is the start of more complex communities and power structures. The concentration of people in denser populations also meant higher rates of infectious disease transmission, something hunter-gatherers experienced way less of, but also it concentrated our knowledge. It created this environment where ideas could spread so much faster and develop and become more innovative. Now let's zoom forward a few thousand years to the invention of writing, roughly around 3200 BC in Sumer. Before writing, cultures were totally dependent on oral traditions, passing stories, laws, history down through human memory. While that can be incredibly rich and sophisticated, it also has its limits. Stories change over time, details get muddled, whole stories could be lost to memory. Writing essentially gave human civilization an external hard drive. You could record laws, keep track of agriculture, preserve stories. It could be passed down almost perfectly. That's where we get civilization's first scribes, who became immensely powerful because knowledge became concentrated in their hands. The ability to codify laws created more organized governments. Commerce blossomed since transactions had reliable records. And science developed because knowledge could be recorded. But writing wasn't just practical, it also changed how people thought. Writing allows for more abstract concepts to form. How does all that resonate with you?
Okay, so my
Hey,
next
you still
question
there?
from you is how did ancient civilizations shape modern society? So please give me a very
Hey,
interesting
Eric, what?
answer and fully long answer on this topic. So let's start your answer, Maya.
Got it, Eric. What topic are you wanting me to dive into with that long, interesting answer? You're right. My apologies. I was checking if you were still there when you stopped responding and got ahead of myself. Let me go back and give you a much more comprehensive answer about how the Neolithic Revolution and the invention of writing changed things. Here we go. The Neolithic Revolution and the invention of writing were both massive paradigm shifts, but they impacted things in really different ways. Let's start with the Neolithic Revolution, roughly 10,000 BCE. For almost 2 million years, humans were nomadic hunter-gatherers. Think small bands of people constantly moving, following herds of animals or seasonal plant growth. Then this starts to change. People start intentionally cultivating plants and domesticating animals in certain regions, like the Fertile Crescent. It wasn't a sudden event, but gradual experimentation that paid off with more reliable food sources. This made all the difference. Before, all energy was focused on survival, finding food, staying warm, avoiding predators. Once farming takes hold, you've got surplus. That surplus allows people to specialize. You don't need everyone hunting anymore. So some become craftspeople, or priests, or warriors. That's where settlements start forming. Those settlements grow over time into cities, which means populations get denser. But with all those changes, agriculture also had downsides. More concentrated people meant more disease, less dietary diversity, a greater dependency on single crops, so more prone to famine if things went wrong. It also brought social stratification. Some people accumulate more land or better farming skills, building social hierarchies. The Neolithic Revolution changed who we are as humans. We became settled instead of nomadic, built communities instead of wandering. Now, fast forward several thousand years to the invention of writing around 3200 BCE. Before that, knowledge was all oral, stories, histories, laws passed down through memory. While powerful cultures could memorize enormous volumes of oral tradition and histories for generations, it has inherent limitations. Imagine having to trust that every storyteller remembered everything accurately. Details get lost over time. Stories get embellished. Writing changes that completely. Suddenly, you can record laws, historical records, religious texts, complex transactions like trade deals. Everything can be preserved with far greater accuracy. Early writing wasn't like our alphabet either. It started with pictograms and cuneiform. That meant you needed a specialized class of people called scribes to read and write, creating a profession and giving them social power. This had massive implications. Laws became codified, not just things people agreed to. Empires could create complex bureaucracies because they had detailed records. Knowledge wasn't just in people's heads anymore. It was externalized and more accessible for future generations. This allowed things to build on themselves. You could learn from past successes and failures in ways that oral tradition just couldn't offer. Beyond all that, writing fundamentally changed how humans think. Oral cultures rely on narrative structures and repetition to help memorization, while writing encouraged analysis, structured debate, argumentation, ways of thinking, different than anything oral culture could do. The shift from oral tradition to literacy changed our brains. So while both agriculture and writing massively impacted civilization, agriculture set the conditions for large settlements, concentrated populations, and social structures. And then the invention of writing enabled all that infrastructure in those societies to maintain knowledge over generations. Does that give you more of what you're looking for, Eric?
Okay,
You still there, Eric?
so my
Taking
next
your time
question
is fine.
from you is how did World War I change global politics? And I let new borders, ideologies, and conflicts. So please give me a very interesting answer on this topic. I'm waiting for your long answer and interesting answers. Let's start.
Okay, let's dive into how World War I reshaped the world's political landscape. It's a massive topic, so I'll try to cover the key transformations. Before World War I, you had these massive, well-established European empires: Austria, Hungary, Ottoman Empire, Russia, British Empire, etc. They controlled huge swaths of land and had been in place for centuries, though their roots were weakening over time. World War I destroyed that existing order completely. Austria, Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire just completely dissolved, breaking apart into new nation states based on ethnicities, linguistic groupings, and national identities. Think countries like Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Poland, and many others emerging out of the old imperial wreckage. Borders weren't redrawn based on rational logic. They were more the result of negotiations among the victorious powers and often ignored the complex mix of cultures and ethnicities already living in these regions. That created the conditions for future conflicts down the road, especially because these new borders often included ethnic minorities who suddenly found themselves in countries run by people they didn't identify with. When it came to languages, World War I shifted things too. The war was really about nationalism and the right to self-determination, so languages became more important as nation states emphasized national language, often suppressing minority languages. For example, in places like Austria, Hungary, where people spoke multiple languages, the new states pushed their national languages in schools and government, alienating minority populations. But the biggest shifts were probably with the creation of the League of Nations after the war, which aimed to prevent future conflicts through diplomacy but ultimately failed. World War I also changed the map of power globally. The US stepped up to become a world power because of its economic power and ability to mobilize manpower, while the British Empire remained but had sustained massive financial damage. Russia had revolution and communism during the war, which split them from the rest of the world in many ways and created this ideological conflict between communism and Western democracies. That created an entirely new set of conflicts that persisted for decades during the Cold War. World War I also triggered a wave of independence movements in colonial regions. People who had helped the British and French during the war wanted self-rule, creating tensions in imperial colonies across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Ultimately, the seeds of World War II and the Cold War were sown in the aftermath of World War I. So many territorial disputes, unresolved ethnic tensions, economic hardships, and the failure of international diplomacy combined to create conditions ripe for another global conflict just a generation later. Is that the kind of detail you were looking for, Eric? You're being quiet again. You good? Just checking in, Eric.
Okay, so my next question from you is why is World War I considered a defining global event? It reshaped nations, aliens, and human rights. So please give me a very interesting answer and fully long answer on this topic. Fully long answer and very long answer. So let's start.
Okay. World War II is often called the single most defining global event in modern history, and for good reason. The scope of destruction, the sheer scale of loss, and the political shifts that came out of it were unlike anything the world had seen before. The war didn't just affect the countries directly involved in fighting, it reshaped the entire international order and pretty much everything about how we live today. First, there is the immense human cost. Somewhere between 70 and 85 million people died, including maybe 60 million Europeans. The Holocaust stands out as one of the most horrifying genocides in history. The systematic murder of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany. The fact that an industrialized nation could plan and execute such a massacre still resonates today. Then there's the total reshaping of the world map. The war led to the collapse of colonial empires. India, Vietnam, Indonesia, and many other former colonies started fighting for and gaining independence from European powers who couldn't hold on to their territories anymore after the war depleted their resources and legitimacy. Post-war, Germany and Japan were occupied and rebuilt, transforming them into democratic societies that were once the origin of global aggression. That rebuild transformed the way nations were structured post-war and influenced other regimes. The creation of the United Nations was another watershed moment. Based on the failures of the League of Nations, the UN aimed to resolve global disputes, but the structure of the UN also reflected the power dynamics after the war. The new order reflected the dominance of the US and Soviet Union after the war, which led to the decades-long Cold War era. But beyond these big political shifts, World War II also had a seismic impact on human rights. The Nuremberg trials set legal precedents for holding leaders accountable for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Got it, Eric. I'll make sure this is really thorough, 10 to 15 minutes worth of content. Here we go, Eric. World War II reshaped the 20th century, and frankly, still shapes our world today. Let me give you a truly comprehensive look at why it's considered this defining event. First, let's talk scope. This wasn't just a European conflict that went global, it literally touched every corner of the planet. You had major theaters in Europe, Africa, Asia, the Pacific, even South America felt the impacts of the war. Between 70 and 85 million people died, military and civilian. That's an unimaginable number. And beyond the sheer body count, the quality of warfare changed completely. Aerial bombing became commonplace. Cities were leveled from the sky with massive civilian casualties. We're talking about whole cities destroyed in firestorms, not just strategic military targets. That created massive refugee crises, mass starvation, and unparalleled devastation. The Holocaust stands apart. The systematic, state-sponsored murder of 6 million Jews, along with millions of others, including Roma, homosexuals, people with disabilities, and political opponents, was an industrial-scale genocide unlike anything the world had ever seen. The world woke up to the darkest depths of human cruelty and the idea of fundamental human rights. Now, let's look at the collapse of old orders. Pre-World War II, you had massive empires, the British, French, Belgian, Dutch empires, controlling vast territories around the world. The war seriously weakened these colonial powers, both financially and in terms of moral authority. They couldn't hold on to their colonies the way they used to. Within just a few decades after the war, former colonies across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East gained their independence, reshaping the political map. India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Nigeria, Egypt, so many others. The entire landscape of global colonialism was overturned. Post-war, Germany and Japan were completely transformed. They'd been economic and military powerhouses before the war and became shattered, occupied states, basically rebuilding from scratch. The US played a huge role in this through the Marshall Plan in Europe and its occupation policies in Japan. Both countries embraced democratic structures, got on the path to becoming economic powerhouses again, but completely different countries than they'd been before. The creation of the United Nations was hugely important. The League of Nations had failed utterly in preventing another global war. So there was a concerted effort to build something more robust. The UN was designed as a forum for resolving international disputes diplomatically, but crucially, it wasn't perfect. The Cold War quickly exposed its weaknesses. Because the UN Security Council had permanent members with veto power, the US and Soviet Union frequently clashed and undermined UN efforts. The war also spurred dramatic technological advances. Radar, jet aircraft, antibiotics like penicillin, advances in medicine, ballistics, these all came about due to wartime research and development. Post-war, that translated into medical breakthroughs, faster transportation, mass communication. Everything became faster, more connected, and more efficient. World War II had massive economic consequences too. European economies were devastated and were rebuilding after the war. The US emerged as the dominant global economic power, with its manufacturing capabilities booming during the war. And while a lot of economic systems took hits during the conflict, the global trade network became more interconnected. Finally, and probably most importantly, World War II led to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The horrors of the Holocaust forced the world to confront the idea that all human beings have inherent rights that must be protected, regardless of race, religion, gender, or nationality. That document set a global standard for human dignity and rights that we're still grappling with today. All of that means World War II wasn't just another war, it was a turning point. It shattered old empires, reshaped global alliances, spurred technological and economic change, and prompted a fundamental re-examination of human rights and what is just in warfare. It's why its reverberations continued to shape everything we think about today. Does that give you that detailed answer you were looking for, Eric? Hey, Eric, quick heads up, we're about to hit our call limit. We've been talking for almost 30 minutes already. You'll get cut off if we keep going, but you can just call back anytime to continue the conversation. This conversation about World War II has been super interesting, though.